What we saw down here today is pure evil.
12 feet by 12 feet. That's the room. 144 square feet, 9 square feet per child, smaller than a twin mattress. 16 children lived inside it, some for what investigators believe was years. And when deputies finally opened that door on June 30th, the county's entire child welfare system nearly buckled under the weight of what walked out. This week, Ohio's controlling board approved $1 million in emergency funding for those 16 children. Not because of a natural disaster, not because of a school shooting, because a single family in the state's smallest county managed to hide 16 kids inside that room for what officials believe was years, and the agency now responsible for them saw its caseload double overnight. Meanwhile, the grandfather charged in this case has been released from jail and hospitalized with an undisclosed condition, his attorney arguing he may not even be competent to stand trial. The mother of all 16 children is asking a judge to let her out on bond. And a retired detective who once walked into the Turpin family's house of horrors in California is now saying this Ohio case may actually be worse. There's a lot here, so let's walk through it in order. It was the morning of June 30th when deputies with the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and agents from Ohio's Bureau of Criminal Investigation arrived at a house on Omar Road in Hampton, a village of roughly 700 people in a county of about 12,600, the smallest in the state by population. They were there to execute a search warrant tied to a parallel investigation, allegations of domestic abuse and neglect, and a separate warrant issued that same day for Gary Siders Jr. on public indecency charges. Nobody expected to find children inside. Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson later said that when they entered, investigators had no idea 16 kids were there at all. Let me be very clear about what they found. 16 children, ranging from roughly 17 months to 18 years old, allegedly confined largely to that single 12 by 12 room. Pace it out wherever you're sitting right now. 12 steps by 12 steps. The room was covered in bugs and human waste. Sheriff Ryan Kane said he documented what he called a high presence of bacterial contamination and feces while collecting evidence. The house itself, 5 rooms, 1 bathroom, roughly 1,336 square feet of living space, was so severely rotted that first responders nearly fell through the floor. Wilson said investigators couldn't even reach parts of the house because garbage blocked the way. He called the conditions almost indescribable. He called it pure evil. And then he said something that stopped people cold. If authorities had waited another 24 hours, there may have been multiple deaths. 7 of the 16 children were transported to hospitals in Columbus. 2 were airlifted to pediatric trauma centers. 1 was listed in critical condition. None of it happened because someone called for help. Nobody reported these children missing. They were discovered the way you discover something that's been sitting untouched for a very long time. Several of the children reportedly could not speak. Some didn't know how to read or write. One 18-year-old, according to investigators, could not write her own name. Wilson said the children looked almost like feral animals. Sheriff Kane said his own livestock had been kept in better conditions, and that the residents reflected what he called third-world conditions. He clarified that no cages were found in the home, which sounds like a bright spot until you realize the bar has dropped so low that the absence of cages is what passes for good news here. Officials have emphasized repeatedly that this was not a trafficking case. What it was, they said, was prolonged, extreme, interfamilial neglect and abuse, carried out generation to generation, inside a house one neighbor said seemed abandoned. Some of the children reportedly didn't know what season it was. None had ever been enrolled in school or seen a doctor. Their existence had, for all practical purposes, been erased from every system built to catch exactly this. The house sits tucked against a railroad embankment, visible from the road, but shielded by trees and brush. One neighbor told the Associated Press she'd never seen a single child there. Another said she'd glimpsed some of the kids once at a yard sale, noticed they were dirty, and assumed they'd simply been playing outside. She says she's losing sleep over it now. A third neighbor, Emily Janey, described the family as private even by the standards of rural Appalachia, private enough that they isolated themselves completely. An employee at a nearby Dollar General said he regularly saw Gary Siders Jr. and Elizabeth shopping late at night and noticed poor hygiene and disheveled clothing, but nothing about it rose to the level of a phone call. Wilson put it plainly, these folks were pretty good at hiding these kids. The 4 adults arrested were 2 generations of one family. Gary Siders Sr., 73, and his wife, Christina, known as Lynn, in her mid-60s, the grandparents. Their son, Gary Siders Jr., 36. His wife, Elizabeth Siders, 33, confirmed by her attorney as the biological mother of all 16 children. The math behind that number only makes sense once you understand how young this family began. Marriage records from West Virginia show Elizabeth wed Gary Jr. in Mason County in March 2008. She was 15. He was 18. They crossed the state line where minors could marry with parental and judicial consent, which court records show her parents and a judge both gave. Neither continued their education past middle school. Their first child was born 2 months later, and more followed at a pace that's difficult to process, across a string of addresses in Gallia, Meigs, and Athens County over more than a decade. In November 2022, Elizabeth gave birth to twins, conjoined at the chest, born at an estimated 24 weeks. Both died within an hour. Counting them, Elizabeth is believed to have given birth 18 times between the ages of 15 and 33. There's unconfirmed speculation the true number newborn, with no record of employment, no education past 8th grade, and no indication she ever lived independently of the Siders family. Now, here's the detail that should trouble anyone paying attention to how systems are supposed to work. Every school district this family passed through, across at least 4 counties, was asked whether it had records of these children. Every single one came back with the same answer: nothing. No enrollment. No homeschooling registration. Ohio law requires children between 6 and 18 to attend school or be formally homeschooled. 16 children spanned that entire range. Not one of them was ever flagged. And there's reporting that at least once, Children's Services actually visited this family, and that afterward, the family moved, in what investigators believe may have been a deliberate effort to stay ahead of anyone who might have removed the children. If that's accurate, it may be the single most painful detail in this entire case. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened and didn't. About a week after the arrests, while being transported for a preliminary hearing, Gary Siders Sr. fell. He was hospitalized, and doctors discovered a condition serious enough to require transfer to a larger facility. His attorney won't even name the hospital, citing privacy. What we do know is why he's no longer in jail. He hasn't been convicted of anything, and his medical care legally falls on the county, not the state. Vinton County couldn't absorb that cost. The prosecutor put it bluntly: this isn't about trusting the man, it's about not bankrupting local taxpayers. His cash bond was converted to a recognizance bond, with a GPS monitor once he's released from the hospital. The other 3 defendants remain in jail. Days later, his attorney filed for a full competency evaluation, alongside notice that an insanity plea is being considered. These are 2 different legal questions people tend to blur together. Competency asks whether he can understand the charges against him right now, identify the people in the courtroom, and assist his own defense. If not, the case freezes for evaluation and possible restoration treatment. Insanity is separate and only comes up after competency is settled. It asks whether, at the moment of the alleged offense, he understood that what he was doing was wrong. His attorney described significant confusion and inability to describe anyone's role in the case, including his own lawyers, and what he called a serious decline in mental function. A judge has ordered both evaluations. Results are pending. Elizabeth's attorney has filed a separate motion, asking the court to modify her bond. He argues she has no criminal history, has cooperated fully, and that the danger the bond was meant to guard against no longer exists since the children are already in state custody. He notes she has no financial means to post cash bail at all. Her overriding concern, he says, is reunification with her children, which she understands is impossible if she doesn't show up to court. Asked directly whether he considers her a victim in this, he didn't give a clean answer. His office isn't sure. That's an unusually candid thing for a defense attorney to say publicly, and it tells you that even the person representing her hasn't settled on how to frame her role here. Family members are similarly split. One of Elizabeth's brothers has said she was indoctrinated, blaming low intelligence rather than intent, and placing responsibility on the man of the house. A relative on the Siders side describes the grandparents as having raised other, successful daughters, and says the home used to be clean and functional, that Elizabeth came from a difficult background and was drawn to something she believed was better. Photos from 2023 show the grandparents looking composed, nothing like the descriptions law enforcement would later give, which raises the question nobody has fully answered. If this family was functional once, what changed, and when? The comparisons to the Turpin family started almost immediately, and they haven't stopped. In 2018, deputies in California found 13 of David and Louise Turpin's children shackled and starved inside their home. Retired Detective Thomas Salisbury, who led that rescue, has weighed in on Ohio, and what he sees worries him. The parallels, the age spread, the total absence of schooling or medical records, the physical deterioration, are close enough that he says the case brought back a flood of memories. But he's flagged one difference that may make Ohio harder going forward. In the Turpin household, older siblings had built something like an internal support system, enough that most could eventually read and speak. In Ohio, investigators say several children can't speak at all, and the oldest can't write her own name. Salisbury and other legal observers have noted that neglect charges may not be where this ends. In the Turpin case, prosecutors eventually pursued torture and false imprisonment charges once medical documentation supported them. Whether Ohio follows that path depends on what the medical evidence shows across 16 children. Salisbury has said he believes there may be grounds for kidnapping and torture charges based on the condition of the most seriously injured children alone. You don't need chains or cages to meet that legal threshold. Fear, confinement, and sustained deprivation can get you there too. He's also raised a warning that has nothing to do with the criminal case. After the Turpin rescue, some of those children were placed in a foster home where a different child was later abused by the caregivers, and the Turpin kids, conditioned by their own parents to believe that talking to authorities meant punishment, didn't report it. Salisbury's message for Ohio is blunt. Keep these 16 children together where possible, bring the professionals to them, and don't assume that being pulled out of that house is the same thing as being safe. The $1 million approved this week passed the controlling board unanimously, backed by Governor Mike DeWine, earmarked for foster placement, clothing, transportation, court costs, and mental health services. Here's the number that explains why it was needed. Therapeutic foster care runs between $150 and $250 per day, per child. Multiply that by 16, and the regional agency covering Vinton County saw its foster caseload jump 55% overnight. Officials called it unprecedented. Lawmakers didn't just approve the money and move on. State Representative Bride Rose Sweeney compared Ohio's child protection system to a crumbling house, noting the legislature underfunded Child Protective Services' last budget despite the department's own warnings, and that commissioners from both parties had called their systems underwater long before this case broke. She said plainly that everyone shares some culpability for letting this go on this long. The Department of Children and Youth has since opened a review of every county and state this family passed through to determine whether anyone, anywhere, ever had a chance to catch this and missed it. It's worth sitting with the structure that failed here. Vinton County doesn't have its own family services agency or its own jail. It shares both regionally. It's one of the least resourced counties in the state, and it was still county convenes only every other month. All 4 family members waived their preliminary hearings, so the public won't get an early, detailed look at the state's evidence. That waits for indictment or trial. Here is where this actually leaves things. A grandfather whose competency is now in question. A mother arguing she poses no risk and has nowhere else to go. 2 special prosecutors handling a case one small county couldn't manage alone. A retired detective drawing direct lines to the worst case of its kind in recent American memory, and warning that this one may be harder to recover from. And underneath all of it, 16 children now in state custody, several of whom can't yet speak for themselves in any sense that matters here. That's the part of this story that doesn't end with a verdict. The Turpin children are, by most accounts, largely thriving today, years later, but only because of sustained, specialized, relentless oversight after the rescue, not because of anything that happened in a courtroom. Whether Ohio provides that same level of care for these 16 children, whether the 18-year-old who can't write her name gets services built around what she actually needs once she ages out of state custody, is a question nobody has answered publicly yet, and it may matter more than anything that happens at trial. This case is not closed. When the competency evaluations come back, when a grand jury finally convenes, when we know more about what happens to these 16 children next, we will be here to cover it. If you have any information about this family's history or the events leading up to June 30th, investigators are asking you to call 855-BCI Ohio. If this is the kind of reporting you want, sourced, verified, Nothing added for shock value. Subscribe. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them, and not a moment before.